Welcome to So Much Crime, So Little Time, Winter Shorts. I am Jeff.
And I'm Dee, and for our winter series, we're recapping short true crime stories.
In this one, we're going to talk about a show called America's Crime Lab, specifically an episode that came out on October 8th of 2025 called The Skull in the Wall. DNA reveals Esther Granger's story.
If you haven't listened yet, you can find a link for The Skull on the Wall in our show notes.
All right, Dee, let's talk about this one. This, as you know, I picked this story because I thought it would be a slightly more palatable Christmas story.
Is it just because it was so long ago?
That's a big part of it, yeah. Is that not true? Do you not think that a crime, and there's not even necessarily, well, there's definitely a crime here, but it's real vague what the crime actually was. But do you not feel that the fact that crime happened almost 200 years ago or 150 years ago, like softens the brutality of it?
Oh, yeah. So confusing, though, no? Did I miss something? This was such a short episode.
Yes, very short.
And yet, we hear about so much.
So many
and
things.
Yet, I'm left with so many questions. It's like, obviously, the element here that is fascinating to me was the DNA and how they traced everything.
Mm-hmm.
Also, how they transported, like, evidence. Also fascinating.
Yep.
I loved the little tidbit about who's your one in the office?
Raina, the one who gets the mail.
Who has, like, the good snacks.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, you know, has, like, good, like, rapport with the FedEx drivers and stuff.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Loved that. So we hear about so much, but we've no idea what really happened here. Seemingly Esther died in childbirth.
Mm-hmm. At like 16, 17. Yeah.
And then we think her grave was robbed and her head ended up in the wall. Because they skirted over so much then, whether it was like, they were like, oh, and then like a doctor lived here for a while. And then whatever. And I'm like, what are we not saying?
Yeah.
Because it felt to me like grave robber. And that's when we're going to stop guessing or putting out suggestions or possible scenarios as to how the skull ended up in the wall. That was weird.
It was weird. I almost feel like the name of the show was The Skull on the Wall. And while we opened with the discovery of the skull on the wall back in 1978, which I thought was fascinating and well told, then we really kind of rushed through the whole, like, okay, how do we think the skull actually ended up here? And I mean, you could have done a whole episode on 19th century grave robbing. I mean, that also relates to selling body parts for like medical study, right? Like the study of human anatomy. That's a fascinating topic. You could have done a whole thing on and they mentioned this briefly, why people would just stuff things in walls as insulation that could include body parts, I guess. Is that really a thing that happened elsewhere?
Yeah, that was funny with not the body parts, but like with the corn.
The corn cob.
The corn cob.
Yeah.
And they were like the ear of corn. It's like, yeah. I get that people put stuff in walls, but like, do you not need to pack it for the insulation to make?
But think
Does it
about
not need to be tightly packed?
Think about what you're talking about. You're talking about the 1860s or so. They're not getting these Amazon boxes in the mail with all these, those little pillow packs or packing peanuts.
Yeah, but like one piece of corn.
Maybe there were other pieces of corn and the rats got to them.
Maybe.
I don't know. It's weird that it was a single cob of corn. Who has a single cob of corn?
It felt very much like, oh, I'm just going to throw that over there.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I also don't think there was a regular trash collecting back. Like there wasn't a truck coming around in the 1860s.
But like, what? Okay, so then it leads me back to some more questions because I'm like, are they saying was the house? Did they note this that the house was very old?
Yeah, the house was very old. So I did go and do slightly more research into this, and there isn't a ton of information because this actually just fairly recently came out, and it's a fairly new story. But there have been some more stories about this case. I was reading one on NPR that came out on October 25th that talked about how this part of Batavia, Illinois was like the oldest part of town and does date back to that time period. So yeah, that's kind of remarkable that there are still some houses from that time period that people are living in. Like for
Mm.
America, I mean, I know that happens out. I mean, I've been in those houses on the East Coast, like out near Boston, but we don't have those really in California.
All the historic stuff is like very young.
Yeah.
I find it funny. Paul and I find it very funny. It's like historic Murphy Avenue, and you're like, historic? Is it though? Like,
It's from the 1950s. Yeah.
yeah.
Can we talk about, I mean, so yes, that was the first thing I noted was what I thought was going to be the whole focus of the story was sort of an afterthought and rushed through. But we also had all these like fascinating people that were sprinkled in. Like, you mentioned Raina, so she was a character. She was fun. But Carla Davis, the genetic genealogist, who,
Oh,
yeah, so she didn't know who her dad was. It's like, how do you get into this? How do you become this? Okay, so she was born not knowing who her dad was, wanted to find that out, and then she's helped find like 200 people find their birth parents. And it's like, okay, that's awesome. That's amazing. Good for her. Okay, how do you make this pivot into crime? Oh, well, her 10-year-old daughter's friend was kidnapped and brutally murdered.
like what?
Why? Where's that story? What's that story?
Yeah.
So that was one. And then also, like, to jump back to Esther's story, they have to find a living relative, and the person they find, this guy Wayne,
Is a policeman, like is a detective.
not just that, but he worked on cold cases.
Yeah. Wild.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah. That was crazy. Yeah. Do you know, and it's kind of that element, like, say, even just those two experts, what I felt like we might have been missing here is like, why isn't there some couple of minutes of like, you know, you've done this before. What do you think might have happened?
Yeah, that really wasn't
we
there.
We got that.
Yeah.
Up into the grave robber. And then we're like, and then the skull is on the wall. And do you think the body's in the wall? Ah, no, the cadaver dogs never smelt it, so we never bothered to look. Cool.
What?
Maybe they're distracted by the corn. Like, did anyone think that they might have smelled the corn and not be smelling the skull?
That gets at probably I have a couple of main criticisms of the storytelling here. One of them is that it sort of just glossed over seemingly major points. The other one is this is another one of those stories where you've got kind of the expert who wasn't the host. That was kind of weird. The expert was the producer, Catherine, and the host, Aylin, was sort of there to do the reaction. And this is going to be mean, but I'm going to say it. I felt like her reactions, and I know we've listened to a lot of true crime podcasts now, and I've come a long way in my understanding of true crime as a genre, but I wrote down some of her reactions to some of the things that were said, and I found that they showed a level of sort of inexperience in this space. Like, I think one of the first things she said was, I just presumed all dead bodies were found right away. And I'm like, oh no. Like, why would you think that? What would possibly lead you to believe that is in any way the reality? And then the other thing she said, when Catherine first went to this place, this Othram lab, and she said, yeah, there was just like a leg bone on the table, and Aylin said, like, it's like a sci-fi movie. Like, no, it's like a crime lab where it's like a crime lab. That's what it's like.
And like, but
it's mean. I know it's mean.
It's interesting because the whole podcast is about this lab.
Okay. Yeah, we should talk about
Othram's forensic DNA lab is like, that is America's crime lab. And Aylin, she's a journalist and a clinical psychologist. So it's like, well, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but it feels like it's not as if she is an unskilled, it's not as if she's an amateur coming into this. So it's bizarre that her commentary wasn't adding anything really to the story.
Yeah, actually that's interesting because and I don't remember if we talked about this in the preview, but yeah, I mean, she has a PhD. She, according to the internet, she's an award-winning producer, media creator, and host. She has it's actually interesting how they phrase this. Her work has been reported on in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and a bunch of other places. That's a kind of twist of that phrase. It's not that she's like written things for the New York Times. Her work has been reported on in the New York Times, which is like they could have just had a mention of her in some article. She's done a bunch of other podcasts that have performed well, and she has won some awards. But yeah, is this podcast just a corporate shill? Like, is this a company trying to promote itself? And how do we feel about that? Because I think it is. This is a for-profit company.
Oof.
And so the article that I read, the NPR article I read, gave a little bit more context about how this whole story unfolded that was not in this podcast, at least not that I remember it. So, okay, you are a police department in Batavia, Illinois, or wherever. You have a cold case, and you need this sort of advanced, expensive genealogical and DNA research done. You don't have the technology to do that. You want to send it to this lab. This lab is not going to provide that service for free. You need to spend $10,000 on that, or whatever it is. I think in this case, it was like $7,500. Othram found out about this case and said, hey, a lot of people with cases like this do crowdfunding. You could try that. So the police department did that, and they raised the money, and they could pay for the lab to do the work. And now the lab turns around, produces a podcast on this, gets a bunch of press on this, including the NPR story I read, which encourages other people to spend $7,500 to have them do this research. Like, it's sort of a commercial on a commercial on a commercial. Yeah. I feel a little gross about that.
Okay, I feel ways about that now. I didn't really understand that before. Because I did think it was weird how it was like selling the kind of like, the adoption thing. And it's so fascinating. Because it is fascinating when you hear of someone who finds out about their birth father. But I suppose what I found interesting about that, it was like, and it was great. Even though, he had passed away at this time, I still got to know a little bit about him, which I can understand that. And it was like, I felt more whole knowing that. But having not known about the Othram Lab thing, I thought it was both fascinating and odd in its presentation. Not the feeling of the person themselves, but just the presentation of it felt like I'm watching an ad. Like, do you struggle with psoriasis? Try blah, 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 which we see like so often over here,
Yeah, if you listen to this podcast and don't know who's putting it out or who it's associated with, I think you have a different reaction than if you do.
Yeah, and I feel like that's kind of shitty.
Yeah.
Because like I listen to a podcast called Choiceology, who's brought to you by Charles Schwab, and they make it very clear at the start. It's kind of brought to you by Charles Schwab. Charles Schwab is not mentioned throughout the podcast. It's not as if they're saying they've a guest on and the guest is like, and then I used Charles Schwab and now my life is better. Like, that's not mentioned at all. The podcast is detached from it. Any episodes I've listened to anyway. But at the start and the end, it's very clear that it's brought to you by Charles Schwab. And at the end, usually there's like kind of a plug of a product. But it's not as if it's part of the story. It's like a detached segment nearly. So I don't have like a fundamental issue with a corporation having a podcast and trying to plug themselves. That's not what I have an issue with. Yeah. But I do have more feelings there. I think I'd like to listen to it again knowing this. I'm kind of questioning what I heard now. Like, even with the Christmas tree thing and the FedEx and the relationship, they're like, oh, there's one driver I really like. Like, I'm a little bit like, oh, is this all just very curated? And is the presentation purely a publicity stunt?
So I brought that up. At the same time, I think it is maybe hopelessly naive to think that this is not just sort of all around us all the time. The name of this podcast is America's Crime Lab. They're not really hiding it, which I think would be worse. I think they kind of wear it on their sleeves. I think what I was kind of confused by was I would have been shocked if they said anything critical about Othram. But also, it's not like they are, I feel like it's just sort of treading that line of pretending to be an objective outsider talking about it and clearly being like an inside production. But they're again, it's called America's Crime Lab. That's what they call themselves. So it's like if you're listening to a podcast called the Charles Schwab, podcast, of course they're going to be, and that's not the name of the podcast you listen to, but like it says it's very blatantly that it's brought to you by Charles Schwab, right? Like it's not hidden.
No.
And I don't think
but what I'm saying is they don't like,
they don't announce
what
it.
I've heard.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're not promoting it throughout.
Right.
In the story they're telling, or the focus, or the expert that they have on. They're not promoting it. But here, I'm like, aren't they?
I think
aren't they subtly promoting it?
I think that's
acting as if it's a story, but really it's promotion. The presentation of it is now brought into question, I think.
But what they do
legitimacy of it
is a story. I think that's the interesting thing. Like, they're not selling you, they are selling a product, but unless you have like a advanced, complicated, old, whatever DNA search that you want to do.
Do they not just do normal DNA as well? Isn't that what we were told about the adoption? Like, they solve cases.
It's a private DNA lab. They specialize in forensic genetic genealogy. It seems like their focus is on this type of thing, although this is like the oldest case they've ever done.
I don't know. I just think it calls it into question the way they presented it all. That's what I think.
Yeah.
Knowing that is weird.
I think it just, I wouldn't put this necessarily in the same bucket as like private prisons, but it's sort of a similar thing of like, it's a version of a privatization of something that maybe seems like it should be like for the public good and not like a for-profit space.
Yep. And yet, if we look at it from a different perspective, a not-for-profit space isn't going to be able to do this because they won't have the high tech to keep up and be able to produce very solid results. I'm sure that's how they'd sell it. And so having a private entity who is willing to invest in the technology at least allows people to make use of it. I don't disagree that I think it should be for public, but it's hard then who pays for it? Because if it's for public use, who's paying for it? Like,
it's interesting, and I know this is sort of like corporate gobbledygook, but their mission is forensics and justice for all. Justice is not a luxury; it's a basic human right. And
human right for $7,000.
They say that they specialize in solving otherwise unsolvable homicides, identifying human remains and victims, and identifying the assailants and sexual assaults. And, there's a nobility to that mission. And I think what you said is true. Like, if what they were offering is a more premium service with more advanced technology than like your local police department or county could afford, it's going to come at a cost. Like, they could set up as a nonprofit and do fundraising and provide this service for free. That's a choice. And they chose a different path. But
yeah, well, I suppose maybe the plan is once they get to a certain profit margin to have that funnel as well. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. But also, like, you and I don't work for a nonprofit, but we're in a space that has many nonprofits, and we chose to work for a for-profit company because reasons. And sometimes people do. I don't think you can throw them out just because of that. And that's not what you're saying.
And it's not. I think I'm like, oh, was what I listened to, was I wearing the wrong, like, did I have the wrong perspective? Do I feel a little duped by it? You knew this. Did I miss it? Did I just not realize? And if I listen to it again knowing this, how would I feel? I think that's what I'm saying. I'm not necessarily like saying that this is fundamentally bad. I'm just saying, if I went in and I knew that, how would I feel?
Yeah, I think yeah. Would you listen to another episode of this?
Yeah. Yeah,
Why?
hard, yeah. I definitely would. It's short. It felt, and maybe this will be different for different episodes, but it didn't feel gruesome in its telling. I enjoyed, like we did, what was that one? Oh, we listened to it in Summer Shorts. There was like an apartment.
DNA ID.
Yeah, you mentioned this in the preview or in the Time
I
Machine
did.
episode. DNA ID, like same, like that now went into a lot of the gruesome detail. I like hearing the journey of the DNA. I like hearing the how behind solving the case that isn't, you know, the investigation or the interview or whatever. I liked that. And I would like to hear more of it. And I would like to listen to another story knowing this is a podcast by and about a private company who is trying to sell how great their DNA is. Like, I wonder over, like, how many podcasts do they have out?
So this podcast, the show first debuted back in July of 2025. They don't have a lot of episodes. What's interesting for us and for our purposes is they have these single episode ones, but they also have a bunch of like 2 and 3 and 4 parters. This was a 1-parter, but like,
I think what I would like to listen to, I'd like to listen to a few more and see, like, is there any, I'm not saying negativity about Othram, but like, is there any point that they're like, we failed to do this thing, like we missed this, anything that feels a little bit like reflection? I don't know. Or is it all CSI? Horatio Kane knows exactly what to do at each point and he's able to get there. Do you know what I mean? Because they're two very different things. They're two very different ways to present information. And for me, I don't want to listen to a podcast that I feel like is constantly positive and putting a positive spin on stuff. It's not for me.
So I agree with that in principle. I also question, like, what are you here for? Like, what is, because I think you could be here for just, and we talked about this back in, well, I think this is the thing we always talk about with cold cases of like, how different is it when it's a cold case that gets solved? And their stories seem to all be about solving cold cases. So there's a certain element of like, oh, I just want to hear about a cold case that couldn't get solved and then it gets solved, right? For decades or for years, whatever. And there's just this ongoing mystery, and it finally there's a breakthrough. And that seems to be what this show is primarily about, is like telling the stories of those breakthroughs.
Yeah, and similar to Karen Stitt, you know, when we heard that episode about Karen Stitt, we heard so much about the part that DNA evidence played in it. Fascinating. It's so fascinating to me. But I like to hear the measured version. I like to hear, like, it's like when we talk about fingerprints and people are like, look, we got a fingerprint. Now, we have to remember, fingerprints are not 100%.
Right.
There is issues with fingerprint. Like, it's the same, isn't it, with DNA in certain circumstances? Like, when you're talking about, for example, the case that we listened to, and we are talking about, oh, we found their third cousin, and then we found this, and then like, at no point in the telling of the story was anyone like, now, when you're looking at a case that is so old and remains that are likely so long, like from such a long time ago, what's our increase in false results? As we move to like third cousins, and then we've the new DNA sample that we're going against it. Like, again, each time, what is the margin of error? We don't hear that. And we don't hear that, like, you know, and then when we get the last one, now this one is going to tell us, because each time we went along, there was a margin of error that was getting larger. But when we get this final person, this living relatives, and now we have Esther's skull, like, is that when they can definitively say, okay, this is the story? Or is it like through the talking? It just felt to me like it was like, and then we did this, and then we did this, and then we did this, and it was fantastic. But I'm like, well, where's your margin of error here? Because each step of the way, surely there is a chance that you're getting further from your primary, like your source of evidence.
That's a good point.
Do you know what I mean?
I do. Yeah.
And it just felt like that there was no element of that. And maybe I'm only thinking about that more critically now that I know the backstory.
I mean, what I feel like another version of what you're saying is, and I think we've seen this time and again, like, I think you maybe respond the best to a story that's told by some type of objective outsider who has some type of distance from the story and is able to be critical of kind of everyone involved, and to offer sort of a balanced perspective that isn't just sort of like a Homerism, and has, I don't know, just some fairness to the presentation.
Yeah. I don't know that I would categorize myself always liking that type, but I definitely think it is important. I always think it's important to show like let's not gloss over stuff.
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
nobody's perfect. There's no part of science right now that, from my understanding anyway, I'm not a very sciencey type person, but that is like 100%. So why can't we discuss that without it weakening your product or your lab or DNA evidence?
Yeah. If anything, it makes a stronger case by showing a little bit
Absolutely.
of, yeah. I wanted to end on just coming back to Esther Granger because I don't want her to get lost in this. And I wanted to ask you, so she was born in October of 1848 in Indiana. She
Were
married her husband.
you alive at then running marathons in Indiana? No.
I was not, and I've not run a marathon in Indiana. Although I was just talking to someone who did. She married her husband Charles in
Great.
1865. She was
Thanks for
16.
sharing.
So she was
Yeah.
she was
I
16
know.
years old. She died the next year after giving birth to her daughter, and she was buried originally in Merrillville, Indiana, 80 miles away from Batavia. And gosh, that's like, I feel like that's getting a little bit lost here. And I understand this is sort of the time and of the place, but this 16-year-old girl gets married, gets pregnant, has a baby, dies. And like, what a short and tragic life this is. And we hear from her great grandson, or great great grandson is the one that they connect with. And it's just like, actually, I'm forgetting now if this was in the article I read or in the podcast. I think this was in the podcast where he talked about how like he wished he'd talk more to his grandmother. He wished he knew more about his family, that side of his family. Yeah. I don't know. There's a line in this article from the mayor of Batavia. Thank you for helping us solve a mystery that we didn't have a murderer that we didn't know about. Yeah.
I do think just to counter what you're saying there, like, of its time, not shocking that a 14-year-old, what we would consider girl,
16. She was 16.
Sorry, 16-year-old getting married, and how tragic it was then. She was pregnant, she had a baby, and then she died shortly after childbirth. The counter of this is she died. Really sad. And I suppose maybe this goes more along the lines of like what your beliefs are for like the afterlife or whatever. But how incredible that whatever did happen to her body after death, her story is being told now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, her name is on a podcast. Like, we're discussing it now. And I don't know, there's something kind of what's the word? Okay, I'm going to try out some words that are in my head. Like, there's something kind of like magical, or I don't know how to describe it. Like, this is like a story. Like, this is like a story, like a fiction you'd read about, like the journey, the post-mortem journey. And like, it's just kind of fascinating. She lay there for however long in the wall, and then her skull is found, and then this journey happens, and then her great great grandson hears about her, and it's like, oh, I wish I knew about her. Like, would he? Like, he wouldn't. Who's your great great granny?
Yeah, I don't know. I met one of my great grandmothers. One of them, not great. Don't know.
Fascinating, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
That like he knows her name. He knows a bit about her story, and I don't know. There's something kind of heartwarming.
Yeah.
It's a weird way to put it, but like, in a way, I'm like, wow, like, there's this connection between Don't know. A little bit of have you watched what's that Disney movie?
Coco?
I'm supposed to. Coco.
Oh,
It's
love
kind of
Coco.
giving Coco.
Such a good movie.
Like
Yeah.
this connection, you know? And
Oh, that's the saddest movie.
but it's like it's beautiful as well though.
Yeah. Visually, it's more like
And-
one of the best movies.
Yeah, but this is kind of giving this like magical, heartwarming vibe, which is very weird. We don't come across many heartwarming stories here, Jeff. Would you listen to another this episode? Or of another episode from this podcast?
I think my interest in cold cases that get solved is balancing out my dislike of sort of like corporate sponsored podcasts. So yeah, I would try it. Sure. I'm curious.
Oh, interesting. I thought you would hate to. Okay. Well, maybe we will maybe if they have another series out in the future, we might jump back in to another one, Jeff. Add it to the list.
So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of Mind Glove Media. The executive producer is Paxton Caloriso. Our associate producer is Blythe Ty. Our theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to this show on your podcast app. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.
You're awful depressing today, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I might need to start fresh again tomorrow.